Welcome to another episode of Cultivate. This is a show about you and your journey in the cannabis industry. It's moving fast, but there's room for everyone. Buckle up as we bring you the people and the technology that are blazing the trail. Welcome to another episode of Cultivate. It's Boveda's podcast, bringing you the people and the technology that are blazing a trail in the cannabis industry. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Drew.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. It's been a while.
It has. It's good to see you.
It feels a little awkward almost.
Let's get going. I mean, we got a great guest to start this thing off.
Super excited. David from GMP Collective. David, how you doing?
Hey, good day. I'm doing pretty well. It's amazing to be here.
In Minnesota. Live in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, yeah,
This is
Minnetonka.
fun.
You betcha.
Oh, he knows.
He does. He gets it. He speaks Minnesotan.
I can be a chameleon, so I'm pretty happy to be here.
You found us today. You found Boveda. We're set up in Ramsey's newfangled studio. We're excited to be back. David Vaillencourt, GMP Collective. How about we start with a little credibility? I mean, what's GMP Collective and how did this connection and this relationship start? And we'll just have a friendly conversation about how you got here and then what the ramifications are for all these new things that are coming up in the cannabis industry.
Yeah. Well, I flew in. I think we want to go a little further back than that, perhaps. So before flying in, I've got a master's of science and did quite a bit of work in government. So I did DoD contract work in Department of Interior. Two of my last gigs were doing project management for the oil spill assessment down in New Orleans and overseeing the quality assurance plans and all of the sampling. And, I met with a startup group in California that was doing, they had the first patent for disposable vape pens and realized that, hey, do you guys have SOPs to ensure that your product is created consistently?
SOPs being?
Standard operating procedures.
Okay.
Yeah. Lots of lexicon. Again, coming back from that government world, there's an acronym for an acronym and a long of a short of those. So realize that's something that's really missing in the industry, and without that, you can't have repeatable quality. So I kind of went on this quest to actually understand a bit more about the industry, and this is back in 2015 and 2016, and got connected with a couple of large firms, got my ISO audit lead training certification. I worked with some companies up in Canada, and ultimately, long story short, started GMP Collective in late 2018, and it's been a solid and fun 2 years with a great team.
So the G, M, and P stand for?
So yes, another fun acronym. GMP, I've heard a lot of different interpretations of it, but it stands for Good Manufacturing Practices. And you could really think of it as, say, GXP of just good practices, best practices, period, as simple as that.
So this is so timely for us in the cannabis industry because we've had conversations over the years about access. The narrative has been focused on access. And just in the last year, we've seen more and more people start talking about quality. The shift in the narrative from an access, how can we get cannabis, whether it's medical or adult use, and now that access has become assumed in many territories, even though it's still pretty tenuous in some, now it's about quality. How do we find a way to install quality standards for how the cannabis is produced and cared for and delivered to the consumer?
Mm-hmm. And hopefully this doesn't incriminate any of my family, but where I come from in Massachusetts, I've got uncles and family and friends that, it's a legal market there. And they're like, I'm still going to my guy down the street because I trust him. I know that he's going to give me what I'd consider to be consistent quality, and it's cheaper. Because back to the access, you've got certain markets, I'd like to call it California, where I don't think they've done the best job in terms of there's a reason why 80% of the market is still illegal and underground, or the illicit market, because the access has been so restrictive because the regulations have been so burdensome.
Has any territory been able to get over that general number of 70 or 80% still being in the unregulated market?
I don't think so. I mean, looking at Canada too, where you have a pretty robust medical program that's been there for a while. You've had recreational, which has been countrywide since
2018.
In October. And still the common theme is, hey, how can we grow cannabis to a quality that matches the illicit market or the legacy market? Now, some argue that cannabis might not be safe with the different chemicals that they use and whatnot, but yeah, I don't think we're even close to even being at 50%.
So the question is, we're going to start talking about standards. We're going to start. I mean, is the unregulated market, and I call it the unregulated market. I don't call it the black market. I don't. That's all. We're beyond that. There's the unregulated market, and there's the regulated market. Mm-hmm. And so, in a regulated market, this notion of quality and having things that you measure and things that you hold your standards to, it's becoming a thing. Mm-hmm. And can you talk about the evolution of standards and what's going on? I mean, I know you brought up in our one of our phone conversations the USP. Can you explain what the USP is and what they did in April?
Yeah, certainly. So the USP, another fun acronym, right? The US is the easy part. Pharmacopoeia. That's a bit of a mouthful, but suffice it to say, the U.S. Pharmacopoeia is a 200-year-old nonprofit organization. Forget the FDA, we're going back another century before the Food and Drug Administration even existed. And it was literally a group of pharmacists. They're actually celebrating their 200th anniversary this year. So 1820, a group of pharmacists, which, was more like the medicine man kind of idea back in 1820, right? Got together recognizing that they were getting a bad reputation for these elixirs and products that are supposed to cure these ailments. And you come into the local, town, right? Village town. Again, we're talking 1820 and, that was before the Louisiana Purchase, and our country had I don't know how many states, but we won't go into civics here and in history. It's not what I went to school for. And recognizing that you need standardization, and it's the perfect example is anybody can relate to this. You make brownies or cookies at home or even dinner at home. What's your recipe? Do you have a recipe to make that pasta dish? Does grandma have a secret recipe that only you have access to? Does it call for a cup and a half, or do you sometimes throw in 2 cups of something? Are the ratios different, or are they the same? And then how do you take that from I'm making it for me to I'm making it for the family to I'm making it for a family reunion of 100 people? A little different in scale. Cooking a turkey for Thanksgiving is a little bit more involved than just cooking the chicken breast on the grill in the evening because of the size and the mass. So you have to consider that. And again, back to the turkey example, if it doesn't get to the right temperature, you've got raw meat in the middle and Aunt Edna gets sick. Do you really want that on your conscience? No. So let's take it to cannabis and say, whether it's, regulated versus unregulated, you're producing product for a consumer. They could be for, recreational adult purposes, could be for medical purposes. A lot of people, especially in medical only markets, they've got, health issues. They've got conditions that, perhaps they can't have product that has some low level of contaminants that we could take fine as healthy young adults. So you have to be mindful of that, and you have to have standards, and you have to have tests to make sure that product's
What
safe.
about, and consistency too. So as you go in and buy product, especially if you're a medical patient, you're expecting that you're going to buy, an eighth of whatever it is, and it's going to perform or provide the same outcome every single time.
Exactly.
Especially if you have a very specific need that you're trying to fulfill. Can you talk a little bit more on consistency? And
yeah, the same, take it back to the same idea of like your brownies or your cookies that you're making at home. And, the stakes are a little bit lower there in terms of, that one's a little crispier. It's a little drier this time. You still get that sugar rush. You still get the sugar crash after. But cannabis is a pretty cool plant, right? And we've got terpenes, we've got cannabinoids, it's more than just THC and CBD. It's more than just myrcene, beta-carotene, et cetera. So if they're different ratios every time, somebody that consumes it, say for PTSD, you have the wrong ratios and all of a sudden you're having a panic attack, or you're in the couch on couch lock and passed out, or you're eating 5 bags of cookies. You want to take your product and buy it from the dispensary this week, last month, and next month, and be able to count on the same effects. And without quality and consistency, it's a crapshoot.
right.
Well, and one of the government's main responsibilities, at least it's what you hear them saying, the talking heads when they're on the TV, is safety, the safety of the public. So safety is the standard by which so many regulations are being promulgated by people that don't necessarily have a background in cannabis. So one of the dangers, and we experienced this in California when I was out there in 2017, 2018, there's a lot of people in that system of making rules that have no personal experience in the world of cannabis, no sensitivity toward the plant, no depth of knowledge about the effects. But it's when you have bureaucrats doing that, it's a problem. So is it fair to ask if you're a cannabis guy?
Sure. Yeah.
Are you a cannabis guy?
I would say that I've always been a fan of the plant, and it's become much more a part of my life.
Yeah, I didn't want to get you all into your personal habits, but when people that love the plant and respect the plant get involved in the process of helping us as an industry figure out where we're going, instead of just waiting for this nebulous governmental intervention, because we've spent so much time talking in the last year about how, once they take it off the schedule, it's going to be great. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure it doesn't come off the schedule and the feds don't end up just being another hand that's in the pocket of the producers, the regulated producers, and then inadvertently giving more protection and more power to the people that are not operating in the regulated market. Is that a fair concern of mine?
It is, and I'll bring it back to the question that I did not end up answering about the USP, because I got talking about brownies and cookies, which
and
just
turkey.
Seems,
I've got a lot of
I'm
turkey.
hungry. I'm hungry.
Right, where's those day-old donuts?
I was just gonna say that's a prime example of maybe they need some new SOPs over at Quick Trip.
Maybe a stability study, but we'll get there.
We love Quick Trip. We'll get back to that.
So, the USP is in a unique place because they have the respect, legally have the respect of the federal government. They also are in about 40 countries where if it's good enough for the USP, it's good enough or actually 40 countries adopt their standards. And this is for dietary, for food excipients, and for pharmaceutical drugs. And to your point about April, they released a paper in the Journal of Natural Products regarding cannabis inflorescence. So the bud of cannabis and the quality attributes and considerations. And it was a team of scientists, not bureaucrats, with things like PhDs and MSs at the end of their name, which, speaks some sort of credibility that they studied these kinds of things, besides how to just communicate with people. And, providing a framework for these are the things we need to consider for a product to keep them safe and consistent.
So an SOP is a recipe. And it's an agreement between an executive and a worker that says, this is what we expect you to do in each phase of our process. Fair?
Yeah, I would clarify in saying, an SOP is basically a standard set of operations or procedures, which will in tune ensure that you create a consistent recipe.
So our SOPs are huge in Canada. I mean, every LP has to have them. It's a pretty normal part of the process. Do you see that in the US as well, or?
So I'm glad you bring that up. So this is what usually when I start with a client, I apologize on behalf of the regulatory bodies for mandating SOPs. The reason being that it's the order of operations. SOPs are fantastic. They do not have I've not found that they are utilized in the way that they should be here. Back to the whole, you have to have SOPs before you submit your license application. Well, basically you're saying, I'm going to describe to you what I'm going to do in theory before I've ever done it. That's not how life works.
So it's speculative.
It's speculative. And then because they're pushed to get these SOPs in order so quickly, then they run and they start operating, and there's no, let's go back and actually review this and put it in because, now we have to submit it back to the feds or the state agency for like review and approval. And it's a burden. So they end up just being this great binder, a trophy that just sits there and collects dust.
Well, and the evolution of those SOPs, from a lot of my understanding, is that a group of investors decide they want to have a cannabis operation, and they have an attorney friend that has a boilerplate set of SOPs that, we'll give you the skeleton, the nuts and bolts of what you need in order to be effective. And then they say, we have SOPs, and they're They're not born out of experience, as you expressed. That's huge.
Yep.
So are you, GMP Collective, are you guys involved in the business of helping people do SOPs?
Indeed. So, one of the things we like to say is pragmatic SOPs or pragmatic GMP. So make it work for you. The regulations are there to protect consumer health, right? And it's to, honestly, I like to say, hey, Scott, you and Drew are running a, production line here. Someday you'd probably like to go on vacation and know that Drew can do the same thing that you can. So that when you're sitting on the Bahamas on the beach, drinking your Mai Tai or whatever you have, or you're, smoking your cigar, that Drew's not going to call you at 8 p.m. on a Thursday and say, how the heck do I do this? Say, I trained you on it. You have a record. You have the SOP. You should be able to follow the instructions. Yeah. And 90 to 95% of the time, the SOPs work. Yeah, there's the 5 to 10% of the time where things go wrong and you need a subject matter expert or a second eyes on it. And you document that because the world's not perfect. We're humans. We make mistakes.
Before we forget, if people want to get in touch with you, David Vaillencourt from GMP Collective, how do they reach you?
Probably one of the easiest ways would be to email us, info@gmpcollective.com, or you can just go to our website.
GMPcollective.com.
Yep.
Okay, good. One of the things that we're excited about is you've done some pioneering work in this development of standards and understandings about what's happening. Can you bring us up to date and give us a little thumbnail of where we're at with regulatory concerns in the cannabis industry?
Certainly. So, again, looking at, Canada, states like Colorado, the USP, another group called ASTM International, that's a 120-year-old standards development organization, global group, kind of goes back to, when railroad tracks are being laid and steel consistency. You need consistent steel, and you also need to establish gauge width, right? So you can't go from Minnesota and say, oh, got to go from 19 to 22 inch tracks as we enter Iowa. That's just not an efficient way. So standards also allow us with, global or interstate commerce. So I'm working with ASTM International predominantly, and their standards have been adopted in Jamaica for the medical program. They just adopted 4 of their standards. And Colorado is looking to adopt several of the standards, and there's other states. And, they have a good relationship with the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. So we're actually drafting standards based on the U.S. Pharmacopoeia's article in April to promulgate as, standard protocols for the industry.
So ASTM is somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 to 1,000 scientists and people that are interested in science.
Yep.
And
across 28 countries currently.
USP is another group of basically scientists.
Scientists, yep.
And a lot of the buzz these days is about paying attention to science. So where are we in the state of understanding this plant and what happens to this plant and how we can impact outcomes to have better cannabis for consumers? Isn't that really what the big goal is?
Yeah. And it's data driven, right? So let's follow the data. Drew, you've got one thought about a cigar. Scott, you've got another. I've got a third one. It's subjective. Everybody's got an opinion. What's the data behind it? What is it rooted in? Let's quantify and evaluate. Quality can be very subjective. Do you want it at certain moisture? Do you want certain flavors? Define it. Make it measurable.
This is like the squeeze test. It's like the old days where, well, if you squeeze it and it bounces back, it's great. Yeah. If you squeeze it and it stays smushed, it's too wet. If you snap the twig, it's ready.
Yeah,
I mean, all the different, sort of folklore about how to take care of cannabis.
Yep. Yeah, and it's taking that, and that can be a perfect, if we can measure that. I mean, it comes back to, is the Incredible Hulk coming in and saying, can you snap it with their 2 fingers? Is the petite young person, doing it? What does that actually mean? And, how thick is the branch? I mean, we could get really specific, or we could keep it broad. At the end of the day, it has to be repeatable and measurable so that Scott in Minnesota can get the same result, David in Colorado can get the same result, and, my uncle in Massachusetts can get the same result as well. That's what it's all about.
Do you feel that people are still resistant to, leaving behind some of the old ways of doing things and getting into this newer way of, measuring things based off of science and actual data?
Yes. And, I won't throw master growers under the bus per se, because I think we all as humans are guilty of resisting change. Everybody likes their way of getting to work, likes their car, likes driving at their certain speed. We like our old habits. Old habits die hard. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely a learning curve there. And, when you take, investors from Wall Street, you take, third generation, fifth generation grower from Humboldt County that's been growing and maybe ceremonially burned his social security card as a teenager, has never had a bank account. Then you take a PhD in organic chemistry from Stanford, you throw him in a room and say, go make $20 million of weed this year. Yeah. Well, it's just not that easy. Right. You've got a lot of egos, heads, and different levels of expertise. And it's like taking 3 different languages and having to convert it into one. And there's still no GMP or manufacturing or supply chain person there. So,
well, we work with a group called SaveTheTerps.org, and there's a bunch of very smart people there. I think you probably know some of them. Mm-hmm. Andrew Saman from Orion GMP is becoming a friend, and they've done some pioneering research in what happens to this plant from the time it's harvested until the time it gets consumed. Mm-hmm. And the fascinating thing to me is, I thought with Jack Herer, if you had the cultivar Jack Herer, mm-hmm. and you bought Jack Herer at a dispensary, you're pretty much getting whatever Jack Herer was over at this other place. And it's like every sample it's probably based on terroir, but everything along the way impacts different outcomes. Mm-hmm. So you can end up with 50 samples of Jack Herer and not have anything that looks similar to another, within the same cultivar.
Yes.
That's a trip.
Yeah. I was getting a beer in just across from Stillwater, Minnesota, over in, I forget the town. Hudson. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to a guy there. This is maybe 9 months ago, pre-COVID, of course, when you could just sit next to your buddy or
enjoy a beer.
Yeah. And he had a hop farm. And I asked a question that I thought was, I had an idea about this, gets back to this point you're making here, but I wanted to hear it from somebody else. And I said, you've got, say, your Columbia, your Hood, or Cascade hops. Grow them in Oregon. Cool, you're growing them in Minnesota. They must be different. They can't, don't tell me they're the same thing. He goes, of course, they're absolutely different. That hazy IPA with fresh hops that are grown here versus in Oregon, different environmental conditions, right? Different soil, different pH, different light. Different product. Everything, everything has an impact on it. As inconsequential or large, it comes back to quality. You just need to understand and measure it. It's not to say that Minnesota hops, Minnesota grown hops in a hazy IPA no longer is a hazy IPA, just like saying, Jack Herer grown in Minnesota or, Illinois is not a Jack Herer grown in California. But what are the differences? Let's understand that and be able to say how, because in cannabis, back to the complexity, you may have a different effect. And for somebody that's taking this medically, that's a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
You made a great analogy at the beginning of the conversation about people having the ability to expect certain effects mm-hmm. when they go to buy a particular cultivar. And that if there are variances that PTSD guy, that vet that's going for one effect could end up in a complete panic attack because the constituents of that product are not consistent with what he's been used to. Mm-hmm. So will standards lead us to that? Is that ultimately, do you see the end game? Do you see can you give us an idea of what the picture's like at the end of the rainbow when we get through some of this?
Yeah. I mean, to your point, it's this journey, and it is all about, and anybody that's smoked cannabis, I would challenge them to tell me that they've never had that experience, where even from my local buddy down the street, or even something they've grown themselves, if they're a home grower, that they've had different experiences based on the different bud that they've consumed, even though it's supposed to be from the same, whether you're talking sativa versus indica, or Jack Herer versus Bubba Kush or some other OG strain.
I lost my bike. I like that one. That's my favorite name of a cultivar in the industry. I lost my bike.
I lost my bike.
There's some unique names.
So where's it going? Where are we today? I mean, I think we're pretty clear where we are today. This is a pioneering time in trying to figure out what works and how to be involved in the creation of, instead of waiting for the government to hand down the book as what you have to do, even though that's what they're going to ultimately do anyway. But we got to be able to have some impact on that.
Yeah.
So where we are today versus this, when somebody engages you, like if somebody in Colorado, let's say you're a cultivator in Colorado, and you're listening to this podcast and you're so overwhelmed with enthusiasm for the subject matter that you immediately go to the gmpcollective.com website, contact David Vaillencourt, our guest, and engage. So what do you do for them?
First, let's start and make sure that you're not doing anything dangerous, right? And I truly believe that nobody's waking up in the morning, whether you're an executive, you're a master grower, otherwise being like, I'm going to grow this weed and it might kill somebody. But let's be real. That is a real issue. And there is evidence that, cannabis as itself has never, you can't overdose on cannabis, right? You literally can't. Funny side note, when we used to do studies on animals, like dogs, they gave a dog the equivalent of 42,000 joints. He was comatose for about 18 hours. No heart palpitation, no stoppage, etc. You can't die from cannabis, but you can certainly die from aspergillus being in it. You can die from heavy metal poisoning, etc. So we need to understand your facility. We need to assess where you're at today and give credit where credit is due. You're doing a lot of things right. You just may not have them documented accurately. So let's assess where you're at. And then let's identify where your major risks are. Oh, your drying room's really not fit for purpose, and you've got a couple Quest dehumidifiers in there that, maybe they work better in December than in July. Is that a big risk? What's your data? We need to look at your data and identify back to what's the parameters. You just need specifications, and that's what quality attributes are all about, is having specifications. And it can be wide, as I like to say, so you can drive an 18-wheeler or a school bus through it. Does not have to be laser precise, 19 point. I love when you see C of A's or, your cannabis is like 19.42% THC. Yeah, okay, that's pretty funny. Nobody's that precise. It's plus or minus 20% at best, and that's what the USP advocates for. It's just not that precise. Every bud's different. So
your team comes in, or you have people that you stimulate, and they come in and...
Yep, so we've got a team of consultants that will come in. Pretty much all of them have some sort of international certification, and like an ISO or Association for... the Society for Quality, ASQ, Certified Quality Auditor certification, and come in and, again, the difference between just your average company and where I'd say the GMP Collective is differentiated is back to your point of the passion for the plant. There's some great folks that I've met along the way that I've been able to recruit that, they're in their 50s and 60s. They've led quality teams. They've led third-party, producers of cosmetics and pharmaceuticals. And they're like, this is so cool. I got a guy to get high for the first time in New Brunswick in like 30 years. And it was so neat. He's like, this is amazing. And he's got a wealth of experience, right? And to be able to impart that on the cannabis industry, because we're not reinventing the wheel here, guys. This is ag. This is, dietary supplements, pharma, food. This is just manufacturing. So yes, it is special. It's a very unique and really cool, versatile plant, but come in and let's assess it relative to best practices of standardization so you can scale your business.
So you come into our operation and do this assessment.
Yeah.
And why is that important to us? What's the whole deal around this?
I mean, you could say it's regulations, but nobody wakes up in the morning going into business being like, I hope I can comply. Like, you got to file your taxes. You got to have your small business license. You got to incorporate articles of incorporation. You got to have your bank account. You got to have your documents. Nobody, that's standard, right? I think we've all accepted that in the world. But again, back to Scott's going to go on vacation. How's Drew going to be able to handle Scott's job and make sure, or we're going to open up a second location. How are we going to ensure that your moisture humidity packs are produced consistently, whether they're here in the US, Taiwan, India, China, Germany, you name it. You get two different facilities. If this water doesn't taste the same when I go back to Colorado, is it really Ice Mountain natural spring water? Shout out to them.
Yeah.
So we hired you. You can't come into our facility. You do this assessment. Yeah. Then what happens?
And then we look at it from a risk approach. So, I could sit there and tell you got 50 things you need to fix because we're never perfect, right? Maybe Scott, you look pretty close to perfect, but
Drew.
Oh yeah, we played a joke on you when we came in here. I'm actually Drew. That's Scott. I'm Drew.
Yes, you're Drew.
And you're Scott.
Yes.
Okay, we're clear on that. Okay, so
Unless you want to
so
switch
Scott and
there.
Drew hire you.
I caught that. I need more coffee.
That's all right. No, this is good. I mean, it's like you said, we're not perfect. It's
Right.
it's awesome. No,
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of flattered that somebody would call me Scott, because Scott's the youthful looking cat.
I might be more slightly offended than you would
Anyway,
be.
moving right along.
You can cut that mic, right?
So you come in, you do the assessment, and then keep going in the process. Help us understand. We're in Colorado.
Yeah.
We're in Boulder. We've got a grow. You love Boulder.
Yeah.
I love Boulder
Yeah.
too.
The Boulder bubble.
So, what are you doing for us?
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll ask, how much is it going to cost?
If you have to ask, you can't afford it. No, I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, yeah. So we come in, we do an overarching, holistic assessment. Let's walk your production line. Let's interview your employees. Because again, want to make sure that things are being conveyed consistently. And then we'll come back. We'll kind of generate a summary report. And we'll work with you. And really, there's no surprises at the end of the day. Most of our clients that we work with, they're like, yeah, we had an idea that was a deficiency. We had an idea that was a deficiency. Maybe they don't have controller data points or accurate data points in certain things. Certain things aren't calibrated, whatever it is. And then we'll evaluate and say, well, these are the things. And this is a conversation. This isn't just us telling you what to do. It's, based on your priorities, your budget, your needs, and your definition of quality, right? Maybe you don't care about certain attributes because you care about something else, because you want to differentiate with maybe terpenes over cannabinoids. I mean, I know folks that are like, more THC, and other folks are like, no, let's really focus on the aromatic terpenes that really drive people. When you open up that canister, you're like, wow, like you start drooling. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And so let's identify and prioritize. You got to start somewhere. You get 50 things. Let's tackle the top 2. What do they look like? You don't have a training program? Let's get that going. You don't have a backup grower? Let's get that going. What's your contingency plans? What's your backup plans? Your lights, you're not tracking your lights. You've got a bunch of lights out there. What's your preventative maintenance program? Like whatever it is that really is going to drive the ROI. Because at the end of the day, this shouldn't be an expense. Compliance, it's the cost of quality, the cost of compliance. It's really, quality is free. Like by putting these in place, you can go to sleep at night. You can have, lower your cost of goods sold, have better quality product, and have better customer loyalty and retention.
Right. So you do the assessment, you identify things and set priorities, and then what happens?
And then we basically make a game plan based on those priorities. And we can work in a number of ways. So we've got clients that want to be very hands-on, and we can literally go in and basically move in and become a member of the team, basically work full-time, working with them, implementing best practices. So there's kind of this nice process of identifying the process, walking it down with you guys. So, forget your SOP that your lawyer wrote. You needed that to get licensed, but it doesn't work right now. So let's walk down your process. What are you doing? We'll take notes, and then we'll evaluate it, and we'll put it with some suggestions of this is what you need to do to be, GMP compliant, to make your operation more efficient and repeatable. Go take it, test it on the floor, make sure it actually works. Come back, tell us where we messed up or where it's not practical. We'll come up with an alternative game plan. We'll make a revision, and we'll get it right. Again, there's no such thing as perfect. It's continuous improvement. These SOPs are living, breathing documents. If you're back to the whole, you're almost perfect. If you're not improving, if you're doing the same thing you were 30 years ago, well, do you drive a 1987 Chevy? Like maybe you do because it's really cool and vintage and classic, but it's amazing what gas mileage and horsepower and safety features you can get out of a new car. So you need to be innovative.
Right.
So those SOPs need to change.
So you talked about things that you can measure, and you also talked about quality. And you mentioned a book to us from back in the day.
Yeah.
You don't happen to have a copy of that book handy, do you?
I do actually. And if this is the right place to point it at the camera, one of my mentors and advisors gave this to me, and it's 40 years old, 1979, so 41 years old. And it is one of the most seminal pieces that speaks to when quality was born in manufacturing in the 70s. And it goes through a lot of the stigmas and, kind of preconceived notions of, the cost of quality, compliance, paperwork, documenting, being a stickler because you single lined out, you didn't single line out, you scratched it out and I can't see what your transcription error was. Like those bad habits, changing those easily saves you 10 to 15% in your bottom and top line. and quality truly is free. So, this book, I read it after my advisor gave it to me. It was like, wow, this is exactly where the cannabis space is at. Like, we are a new up and coming, industry that's going from the home grows and the small batch, baking your cookies in the oven to, wow, we're doing this 10, 50, 100,000 square foot facility. We need repeatable quality. We need metrics. We need standards for success so that Mr. CEO can sit there and get a summary report and say, oh, that's what things are going well. There's the metrics we're off target then. Well, Drew said that, this was going really well, and Scott said that was doing okay. And then my quarterly sales came in like 60% lower than what I expected. I mean, you have to have a target. And the same applies to your manufacturing. What's your target? And how are you going to achieve it?
I think we were surprised when we got involved with cultivators all over the world, and so many of them had so many measurements and so much technical data that they used prior to harvest in taking care of making that best possible plant, growing it. I mean, all that blood, sweat, and tears, the passion that went into making that. And then post-harvest, there was like this vacuum of is that common, or were we just fortunate to pick on people that didn't? I mean, because in certain circumstances, we introduced the idea of measuring for water activity,
right?
And as a standard of quality in terms of smokability, the integrity of the trichomes, the discoveries that we've made about water activity have been just mind-blowing.
Right.
But it seemed like that was just a big vacuum. Is that fair, or am I biased because I'm at Boveda?
I don't think you're unbiased. I think that's a fair point. And I would even say it kind of comes back to there's a lot of talk about the master grower. Great. Yeah, you put a lot of time. I mean, think about it. Yeah, you put 8 weeks in the flowering process. It's a 3-month process to grow from, clone to, full veg. And that's a lot of time, which means that's a lot of money, both from a labor standpoint, nutrients, lighting, facility. And then it's almost crazy, to your point, to be like, now there's this vacuum of void of information, like, oh, we're just going to dry it. Well, you went 90% of the way there. Last 10%, you just kind of, it's gone. We're just going to dry it. It's easy. Wow, what's happening when you don't dry it consistently? Oh, well, we'll just over dry it so we don't get mold. Where we're losing terpenes. Yeah, these are called volatile compounds
for a reason.
Right?
Right.
And expose it to light. THC degrades to CBN over time. So like, how are you finding what's that sweet spot? Again, you put all that time in.
What's the recipe?
Like, don't stop there. You got amazing product, and it can easily just it's like your brownies. You cook them 5 minutes too long, and now it's a brick.
Solid.
Like you went so far, you labored over the great grandma's recipe. Don't stop now, guys. Same with packaging. Don't stop there.
So we're excited to have the opportunity to talk to you. David Vaillencourt, GMP Collective, smart guy, scientist by trade, who is passionately involved in the plant, an advocate for the plant, and available to help our friends in the cannabis marketplace to figure out all sorts of answers to questions about their process, their standards, their SOPs, their operational plan. Those are things that you'd be more than happy to talk to people about.
And then you get help. You help people get GMP certified. Is that correct?
Indeed. Yeah. So,
credentials.
And I love that part because give credit. I'm all about give credit where credit is due. People are doing hard work out there. You should be rewarded for it. Whether it's I got trained on being a video producer. I want to give you credit for that hard work because this is a knock-up studio. This is amazing.
Ramsey
right?
Cronin, our producer, highly credentialed.
Top Keys on YouTube, Instagram as well.
A little plug for Ramsey.
Check it out because it makes a difference, right? Versus, the iPhone's come a great way and a long way, and Androids and all that good happy stuff. But this is the real deal. So give credit where credit is due. So right now it's a lot of self-attestations. I grow awesome dope. I make the most premium quality flower. Nobody's gonna self-admit I suck. I mean, maybe some will, but that's not good for business.
Right.
So how do you have somebody impartial come in and say, yeah, you're legit. Yeah, you're doing things right. Yeah, you're not, producing product that's going to injure or harm people. You need independent certification. So we prepare folks for that. We don't do the certification. It's back to conflict of interest. You're going to hire us as a consultant, and then we're going to give you a rubber stamp at the end of the day. No. You're going to go to an accredited third-party group that will, you can't get GMP in the U.S. because that's an FDA term. You can't be fully certified, but there's other basically similar certifications or attestations that these competent groups that do third-party audits for medical device companies, cosmetics, et cetera, can, through an international certification scheme, can give you that. So we prepare folks for that.
And you know the third-party people to point them to?
And we do. Most of us have worked for or with them. So, it's more than just a checklist. Folks will say, oh, just follow this checklist. It's a little bit more than that. And really, for me, it's about engaging with critical thinking skills. Because at the end of the day, regulations or standards say what to do, not how to do it. And the little secret sauce is that we train folks on is be able to work with the auditor, inspector person and say, this is how we're meeting this regulation. And this is how it ensures safety. And if they question you, you get to say, well, this is what we're doing. And what's your recommendation to do it safer? Because here's our data that shows that we're safe. And here's when it's not safe, when we've had a batch fail, had these issues. This is how we've detected it. It's a good thing to see that you've had deviations, that you've had CAPAs, corrective action, preventive actions. Mm-hmm. Because again, we're humans. We're not perfect.
Right. And it's a plant. I mean, you're not synthetically manufacturing a product.
There's a lot of variability.
Yes.
So the future, where we are today, and then what's coming, what can people expect? What's your vision? You're involved in this on a day-to-day basis. You know a lot of people in a lot of marketplaces that are doing the same thing, trying to be able to produce repeatable, measurable recipes. Mm-hmm. What's the future for this industry? What's coming? What should we expect?
The future is almost as simple as data-driven decisions. Taking it from manual, analog, I think, I feel, I smell, to backing that up with data and using that data for you to make informed decisions. I mean, that's GMP in quality in a nutshell. This is not, I like to say, it's not rocket science. It's not complicated. It's just disciplined. And speaking as a person that I look back and I'm like, how did I get through college? How did I get through grad school? How did I write that thesis? Discipline is hard for some of us. But it's having a team that you instill that discipline in, and you're documenting things and you're taking notes and you're being prepared and you're analyzing so that, back to the whole, it takes 3 months to grow this plant and then harvest it. You put all that blood, sweat, tears, and money into it just for it to fail. Wouldn't it have been nicer to have had a control in place so you could have seen that at 6 weeks and maybe put in small corrections than at, 18, 20 weeks, or, it's about to go to the storefront and now you've got $500,000 worth of product that needs to be shredded. Yeah. That hurts.
We've got a friend, Johnny Burfello, up in Canada. That's he Johnny B. Shout out to Johnny B. 420 Weedmaster on Instagram.
Good memory.
He's that's pretty good. The surgery worked. So he's a guy, right? That's why we've been off.
He's been recovering.
Yeah. Thank you for all the cards and letters. So anyway, Johnny Burfello greeted us when we met him with a conversation about standardization. And we've been, we're focused as a company on doing a very narrow thing. We create really precise humidity control that has a broad dynamic and lasts a long time and performs better than anything else in the marketplace. That's our thing. That's what we do. So Johnny B comes into the conversation and he says, I'm looking forward to the day when there's standardization so that I can get the same outcomes consistently, because as a consumer, and he's a medical patient, he got into this for all the right reasons. He had a horrific accident and tons of pharmaceuticals and all sorts of life-threatening stuff, and then cannabis basically saved his life. Terpenes, actually specific terpenes that Bubble Man exposed him to, changed his whole outlook on his health. Standardization. That's where this conversation, that was 5 years ago we were having that conversation with Johnny
B. Yeah,
B.
it was twofold. And he gave a great analogy that has stuck with me for the last 4 years. And he said, think of going in and buying a bottle of Advil. And there's two parts of this. First, you open that bottle. There's supposed to be 30 of them, and there's only 25. But you paid for 30. And then the next time there's 28, and the next time there's 35, and it's all over the board every time. And then the second part of it is, if you go and buy that and then you take one Advil, it relieves your headache. The next time it doesn't, and it's just inconsistent every time. And that's where he felt at that time where cannabis is.
Yep.
And his whole goal and mission is to bring, cannabis from where it was 4 or 5 years ago to a point today where it's standardized.
And that's really what you're talking about, is having standardized procedures, predictable results in an unpredictable world, dealing with a whole bunch of inputs that are going to vary across markets and terroir and nutrients and all these various inputs to come up with things that are reliable and that people can have trust in.
Yeah.
And
Standardized outcomes.
Standardized outcomes.
What's terroir?
Terroir is the ground, basically. It's the. Is that correct? You're the scientist.
the
What's
ground we walk
terroir? I
on.
should ask you.
Yeah, I think is that like the Latin
Terroir. Yeah, or the French or something.
I've never heard of that.
Which would have been Latin in the first place. But it's the underlying, it's like when we talk about cigars, a lot of the differences in quality of cigars has to do with the amount of potash that's in the soil. Like when you went to Dominican Republic, there's a certain something.
Yes, right.
And that's the cool thing, right? Cigars, tobacco, wine, hops. This is all relatable, and same with your product, right? I mean, you just mentioned a high level of precision. That's why people buy your products. Not because it dries,
we
but
sell
dries
consistency.
to what? Yeah. And again, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't need that? Advil? Perfect example. And the cannabis industry, it's a natural product, it's a natural plant. But that doesn't prevent the Chardonnays and Bordeaux's from being very consistent to a specified level. Right. And pharma is no easier. I mean, there's a reason why it takes 5 to 7 years and about $2 billion to create this product. Yeah, it's synthetic, but the reactions and the formulations and, there's theoretical versus actual when you do a chemical reaction, and there's variability every time. You're never getting 78.42%, right? And so they can do it at highly sophisticated levels. Don't try to tell me. I'm not buying the excuse that you can't do that for your cannabis plant. Right. What's your humidity? What's your environmental controls? What's your lighting? What's your power values, your PPD? What's your moisture content, your water activity at the end of the day? What's the drying conditions? What's the size of the bud? I mean, what defines shake? What defines, a grade A bud or a grade B bud? You got to define those things.
Density. I mean, there's just all these variables. So Susie and Bob in Golden, Colorado want to engage you. Will you talk to them for free? Will you answer the phone? Will you,
certainly.
Are they close by enough for you to stop by and say hello?
If they're in Golden, I would love to come by and hang out with them. They're right down the street from me. I'm in, actually 4 of our team members are right in the greater Denver area. We're a virtual group. So we've got folks, we've got 3 folks in Canada. We've got a couple folks in New Jersey, Massachusetts, California, Colorado, Florida, most of the territory covered. So even if COVID prevents us from traveling, we can do a lot of stuff virtually. But give us a call.
So the industry is calling for this. The producers, the new people that have come on board are hungry for this kind of direction.
Yeah. And what's the reality, right? A producer, your problem is really your customer's problem. So what's your customer's problem? They want good quality cannabis. They want repeatable, outcomes and feelings, euphoria, PTSD, relaxation, etc. That's what you need to provide to your customer.
I honestly think one of the two most important words in cannabis right now are consistency and certainty. That's what Boveda provides for our customers. I believe that's exactly what GMP Collective provides. That's what people are looking for. Consistency and certainty. Certainty in supply chain, that products are going to be delivered, on time, the certainty that it's going to be effective, and then the consistency that it's the same, like we've been saying every time you're buying it.
And there are solutions. I mean, I spoke at a global supply chain conference in March, and it was fun, interesting times because it was, I think the week before the world shut down, and one of the VPs for for strategic sourcing for Purell was there, and I don't know how she was able to not be boots on the ground dealing with the fire of her 500 employees figuring out how to get enough Purell out. Right. Because they've got, it's not just one little business producing it all. And to scale up, you've got, dozens of contract manufacturers creating it. You've got bottles that are produced, different labels in the US versus Canada versus Turkey versus ever. It's really complicated. And guess what? They've done a pretty darn okay job relative to the size and magnitude when we're talking, millions to billions of dollars of product, managing that supply chain. And having predictability so that, Kroger or Stop and Shop or, Aldi's can predict, they're like, yeah, we ordered 500. We have a standing order for 500 cases a week. Not, oh, cool, I got 300 today. Oh, I'll get 700 tomorrow. Right. No, you've got your customers, you get your data, you have a standing order. I'm working with a client in Nevada right now that was amazing. They're like, yeah, do you see all this cannabis we're growing? It's already been sold. It's 6 weeks from harvest. So they've got it down so that they can predict within a range, maybe it's 40 kilos, maybe it's 35, but within a range so that they have standing contracts so that the dispensaries know what they're going to get and when. There's no surprises of what shows up Thursday.
Right.
And it's based on what the client wants, what the customers want.
Exactly.
It's not rocket science. If you really want to go to the next level.
But it's a real evolution. When we started watching people come online with brands in California, it was like they put all this effort into creating a brand. It goes to market. People try it. They like it. They go back. They buy it again. Predictable.
Yeah.
They don't, for some reason they're turned off by it, or it doesn't wow them, or it's a harsh smoke and, crispies up their throat when they're smoking it. They're like, I got 25 other brands at the same dispensary that I can go try.
We've been saying that. You have one shot at a consumer.
One shot.
They go in, buy your product, it's bad, never again.
Yep.
There's too many other brands and products out there for them to choose from.
Yeah.
And they also have the guy on the corner. So while there's a marketplace where people won't, there's a lot of people that just would never consider buying illicit or unregulated market cannabis. But there's a lot of people that will. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the quality arguments and safety arguments about the unregulated are fairly thin because these are experts that have been doing it for a long time. Mm-hmm. And they have, I know in their own way, they have their own SOPs, right? Mm-hmm. Standards for how they operate in order to keep getting to the mark that they're shooting for.
Yep.
So you're offering that to people in the regulated market and giving people an opportunity to also have a voice in the process of these regulations that are coming no matter what.
And I think that's really important too. And I don't think I've touched on that enough in terms of whether it's ASTM International, NCIA, your local or state, lobbying groups to show up, get educated, get informed, learn and be part of the solution, right? So you don't want to be blindsided. The reality is you don't have to be. There's no surprises. You can, be a member of the National Cannabis Industry Association. I serve on the facility design committee there. We're writing a series of white papers. We interface with a policy committee that's doing a lot of lobbying in DC to, hopefully successfully manage the kind of deregulation or, descheduling. Not rescheduling, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. But
we are going to get together again.
I hope so.
We are.
I'd like to do like a 2-part or 3-part series with David.
Well, I'd love to have an ongoing conversation. I just think it's healthy, and we can do it with Cultivate. We can do it with some Instagram Live and see how we can reach more people. What a delight for us to get exposed to you and to be connected.
Well, it's really been a pleasure to be able to interact with you guys, see your world-class facility here in just outside of Minneapolis.
So we're going to get together again. David Vaillencourt, GMP Collective, out of Colorado, but they're everywhere that you want to be for standards and credentials and assessments and audits and all the things you need to do to be successful in the cannabis industry. Check out David and his team at gmpcollective.com. Scott, where can people find Boveda or connect with Boveda should they need samples, swag, or other great things from Boveda?
You can always reach us at info@bovedainc.com or on our social channels at Boveda Cannabis.